Kira-chan walked into the large classroom and found her usual seat in the back corner. She moved quietly, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The other students barely looked at her as she sat down and opened her notebook. The classroom buzzed with conversations in different languages. 3 main groups of alien students filled most of the seats. The Zephyrians sat near the front, their crystal-like skin catching the light as they moved. They were tall and thin, with sharp angles everywhere. Their leader, Prince Jektar, always spoke the loudest. Behind them sat the Garvani. These aliens were huge and muscular, with thick gray skin and small eyes. They looked like living rocks that had learned to walk. The biggest one, Thakmar, cracked his knuckles as he talked about last night's combat practice. The Veltar took up the middle section. They had smooth blue skin and large heads with big eyes. Everyone knew they could read minds, though they pretended they didn't do it during classes. Navish, their unofficial leader, kept glancing around the room with those strange purple eyes. Then there was Kira, the only human in advanced combat theory class. She sat alone, as always. Professor Velkan Thros entered the room. He was an old Zephyrian with crystals that had turned pale white with age. His military uniform was covered in medals from wars that happened before humans had even invented the wheel. "Today we study the Battle of Crimson Nebula," Professor Thros announced. His voice was sharp and clear. This battle happened 3,000 years ago. The hegemony forces used classic pincer movements to defeat a larger enemy. Kira picked up her pen and started writing. She wrote down everything. Every diagram the professor drew on the board. Every tactical detail. Every weakness in the old battle plans. The other students took some notes, but they spent more time whispering to each other. They had studied battles like this since they were children. Their families had fought in wars across the galaxy for thousands of years. What could they learn from one more ancient battle? But Kira wrote it all down. She drew careful copies of the troop movements. She made notes about terrain advantages. She even wrote down the supply chain problems that helped decide the battle. The key to victory, Professor Thros continued, was understanding the enemy's psychology. The hegemony commanders knew their opponents would retreat to high ground when pressed. This predictable behavior led to their downfall. Jektar raised his hand. "Professor, my great-grandfather fought in the Nebula campaigns. He always said the enemy's mistake was trusting outdated tactics." Several students nodded. They all had ancestors who had fought in famous battles. They had grown up hearing war stories at dinner tables. Professor Thros smiled. "Very good, Prince Jektar. Yes, flexibility in tactics is crucial. Rigid thinking leads to defeat." The lesson continued for 2 hours. They studied troop formations, supply lines, communication systems, and battle psychology. Kira never spoke up, but she never stopped writing either. When class ended, the other students packed up quickly. They had other classes or training sessions or social events. They moved in their familiar groups, chattering in their native languages. Kira packed her things slowly. She had filled 12 pages of notes. She had drawn detailed maps and diagrams. She had even made a list of questions to research later. As she walked toward the door, she heard Jektar talking to his friends. "Look at the Deathworlder," he said in Galactic Standard. Assuming Kira couldn't understand the formal language well, she writes everything down like she's never heard of war before. His friend laughed. Earth only joined the collective 5 years ago. They'd probably just learned about space battles last week. Takmur, the big Gorvani, grunted his agreement. Humans fight with sticks and stones. No honor in their combat. Navesh, the Voltar, tapped his temple. I can sense her confusion during class. All those tactics are too complex for a primitive mind. They kept talking as they left the classroom. Kira heard every word, but her face showed nothing. She had learned long ago that people said important things when they thought you weren't listening. She walked through the station's corridors alone. The academy was huge, built inside an old space station that orbited a dead star. Students from 50 different worlds lived and studied here. It was supposed to be the best military school in the galaxy. Kira found a quiet study room and sat down. She opened her notebook and began reviewing her notes. But she wasn't just memorizing the lesson. She was thinking about what the professor hadn't said, that the Battle of Crimson Nebula had really been won by logistics, not tactics. The hegemony had better supply lines. They could fight longer. But Professor Thross had focused on the flashy troop movements instead of the boring supply chain work. Kira made a new note about this. She had learned to look for what teachers left out of their lessons. Sometimes the missing pieces were more important than what they actually taught. Her wrist communicator chimed softly. A message from Master Sergeant Kozlov appeared on the small screen. Chun, I'm delayed on Outer Rim diplomatic mission. Extra 2 weeks minimum. Keep studying. Don't let the others intimidate you. Remember what we discussed about patience. Kozlov, Kira smiled slightly. Kozlov was the only other human at the academy. He taught practical combat classes and served as military liaison. He was also the only person here who seemed to understand that Kira's silence didn't mean ignorance. She closed her notebook and looked out the study room's window. Space stretched endlessly in all directions. Somewhere out there was Earth, her homeworld. The planet her classmates called a Deathworld because of its dangerous animals, violent weather, and constant natural disasters. They were right about Earth being dangerous. But they were wrong about what that meant for humans who grew up there. Kira had survived things that would kill most of the aliens in her classes. Not because she was stronger or faster, but because she had learned to think, to adapt, to wait for the right moment. Her classmates saw her silence as weakness. They saw her note-taking as confusion. They saw her small size as vulnerability. They would learn better eventually. Kira picked up her notebook and headed back to her dormitory room. She had more studying to do. There was always more to learn about her new classmates, their strengths, their weaknesses, and their assumptions. After all, the best predators were the ones nobody saw coming. The training simulation chamber was huge and empty when Kira arrived. White walls and ceilings stretched in all directions. But she knew that would change once the simulation started. The Academy's holographic systems could create any battlefield imaginable. She checked her equipment one more time. Standard Academy training armor covered her body. It was lightweight but strong, designed to work with any species. Her helmet had targeting systems and communication gear built in. The training rifle felt heavier than the weapon she had used on Earth, but she had practiced with it for months. Other students filed into the chamber. Today's exercise was worth 20% of their grade in Tactical Operations class. They had been placed in random teams of 4, and Kira found herself grouped with 3 aliens who had never spoken to her outside of required class discussions. Prince Yektar commanded their team. His crystal skin gleamed under the chamber's bright lights. He wore his equipment like he had been born in it, which he probably had. Zephyrian nobility trained for war from childhood. Totmer stood beside him, massive even in the bulky training gear. His people, the Golvani, were natural warriors. Their thick skin could stop most small weapons. Their strength could bend metal bars. Thugmer had won every hand-to-hand combat test so far. No single quotes. Esh completed their team. The Veltar looked small next to the others, but his mental abilities made him dangerous in different ways. He could sense enemies through walls and share thoughts instantly with team members. In past exercises, he had guided his teams to victory without firing a shot. Kira stood quietly beside them as they waited for the simulation to begin. She had read the mission briefing 3 times. Their team had to capture and hold a strategic position while under attack from multiple directions. The enemy would have superior numbers and better defensive positions. Listen carefully. Jektar announced to the team. I have studied this scenario extensively. My family has run similar operations for generations. He activated his wrist display and showed them a basic tactical map. We advance in standard formation. Zutmer takes point as our heavy assault element. Navesh provides intelligence and communications. The human stays in the rear as backup. Kira looked at the map. She could see several problems with Jektar's plan, but she said nothing. Not yet. The key is speed, Jektar continued. We punch through their center line and establish our position before they can react. Classic shock tactics. The chamber's walls flickered and changed. Suddenly, they stood in a rocky canyon with high walls on both sides. Broken stone formations provided cover, but also created blind spots everywhere. A narrow path wound through the canyon toward their objective, a communications tower on a high plateau. Enemy positions appeared on their helmet displays. Red dots marked confirmed hostile locations. Question marks showed possible enemy sites. There were a lot of red dots. Move out, Jektar ordered. Thakmor charged forward down the main path. His heavy boots crashed against the rocky ground. Navesh followed, his large eyes scanning for mental signatures of hidden enemies. Jektar moved behind them. Rifle-ready Kira hung back as ordered, but she wasn't just following. She studied the terrain carefully. The canyon walls had cracks and ledges that most species couldn't use. But humans were natural climbers. Earth's gravity was stronger than Academy standard, so Kira was stronger than she looked. More importantly, Earth's dangerous mountains had taught humans to find paths where none seemed to exist. The first enemy contact came quickly. Simulated hostile forces opened fire from elevated positions. The team's formation scattered as energy bolts flew overhead. Take cover, Jektar shouted. Navesh, where are they? The Veltar pressed his hands to his temples, concentrating. I sense 12 enemies on the left wall, 8 on the right. More are moving to flank us from behind. They were pinned down. Enemy fire came from above, while hostile forces moved to surround them. Jektar's direct assault had walked straight into a trap. We need to fall back and try a different approach, Navesh suggested. No retreat, Tugma growled. We push through. Gavani do not run from fights. They argued while enemy forces closed in. Precious time slipped away. Finally, Kira spoke up. There's another way, she said quietly. The others turned to look at her. She pointed up at the canyon wall. I can climb the right side and get above their positions. Once I'm up there, I can provide covering fire while you advance. Jektar laughed. That wall is too steep. Even our best climbers couldn't make that ascent. It looks impossible, Navesh agreed. I can't sense any safe path up there. Kira studied the rock face again. She could see handholds and footholds that the others missed. Years of climbing Earth's mountains had taught her to read stone like a book. Give me 2 minutes. If I can't make it, we'll try your plan. Absolutely not, Jektar decided. We stick to proper tactics. Deathworlders think every problem can be solved with brute force, but real warfare requires intelligence and planning. More enemy fire erupted around them. They were running out of time. Soon the simulation would end in failure. Kira made a decision. While the others argued, she moved. She stripped off her heavy armor plates and slung her rifle across her back. Then she ran toward the canyon wall. What is she doing? Thakmor shouted. Kira reached the wall and started climbing. Her fingers found tiny cracks in the rock. Her feet pressed against small ledges that barely existed. She moved quickly, but carefully, knowing that one mistake would mean a painful fall. Behind her, enemy fire intensified. She heard her teammates calling for her to come back, but she kept climbing. Halfway up the wall, she found a wider ledge and paused to catch her breath. From this angle, she could see the enemy positions clearly. They had focused all their attention on the team below. None of them were watching the impossible cliff face. Kira continued climbing. The top of the canyon was 50 meters above the simulation floor. Her arms burned with effort, but she pushed through the pain. Earth's harsh environment had taught her to ignore discomfort when survival was at stake. She reached the top and rolled onto solid ground. Her teammates looked like tiny figures far below. Enemy positions were spread out along the canyon rim, but they were all facing inward. None of them expected an attack from behind. Kira unslung her rifle and took aim. The first shot took down an enemy sniper who had been targeting Navish. The second shot eliminated a heavy weapons position that was pinning down Thakmur. Confusion spread through the enemy ranks. They couldn't figure out where the shots were coming from. Some of them turned around to face this new threat, which gave Kira's team the opening they needed. Now, she called down through her communicator, "Move." Jektar led the advance, finally able to push forward with the enemy distracted. Thakmur smashed through their defensive line while Navish guided them around remaining obstacles. They reached the objective with 3 minutes to spare. The simulation ended with victory music playing through the chamber speakers. As the canyon dissolved around them, Kira climbed back down to rejoin her team. Her armor was scratched and dirty, but she was smiling slightly. "How did you do that?" Navish asked. "That climb should have been impossible. Earth has high mountains and strong gravity," Kira replied simply. "We learned to climb early." Jektar's expression was hard to read. Pride and annoyance fought across his crystal features. "You disobeyed orders," he said finally. "I improvised when the original plan failed," Kira corrected. They walked back to the debriefing room in silence. Other teams were already there, most of them looking disappointed. This had been a difficult scenario. Few teams had achieved their objectives. When Professor Thross announced the results, their team had earned the highest score in the class. But instead of celebration, Kira noticed angry whispers from her teammates. They had won, but somehow that made things worse instead of better. Kira walked through the Academy's maintenance tunnels, carrying a small toolkit and electronic components. The corridors here were narrow and dimly lit, far from the main student areas. Most people never came down here unless they had to repair something. She liked the quiet tunnels. They reminded her of the cave systems back on Earth, where she had learned to navigate in complete darkness. The maintenance areas also had tools and materials she needed for her personal projects. Tonight, she was working on modifications to standard Academy equipment. The training gear was built to work with many different alien species, which meant it wasn't perfect for any single species. Human anatomy was different from the others, so Kira wanted to adjust the equipment to work better for her smaller frame and higher bone density. The project gave her something to do during the long evenings when other students socialized in groups she wasn't invited to join. More importantly, it helped her understand Academy technology better. Knowledge was always useful. She found her usual workspace in a maintenance alcove and spread her tools on a metal table. The helmet she was modifying sat beside them. She had been adjusting the targeting system's calibration for human eye placement and reaction speeds. As she worked, Kira thought about the mission simulation from 3 days ago. Her teammates had barely spoken to her since then. They answered direct questions, but nothing more. She could feel their anger growing every day. The victory should have brought them together as a team. Instead, it had created more distance between her and the others. Kira understood why. Even if they didn't say it out loud, she had embarrassed them. They were supposed to be the military experts, the ones with centuries of family tradition and advanced training. But the quiet human from the primitive Deathworld had solved a problem they couldn't handle. Worse, she had done it by ignoring their orders and trusting her own judgment. That challenged everything they believed about proper military hierarchy and civilized warfare. Footsteps echoed in the tunnel behind her. Kira looked up from her work but didn't turn around. The steps were too heavy for maintenance staff. Multiple people, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. "Working late again, Deathworlder?" The voice belonged to Prince Jektar. Kira set down her tools carefully and turned to face him. He stood at the entrance to the alcove with Thekmer and Navsh beside him. All three wore casual clothes instead of uniforms. "Just some personal projects," Kira replied calmly. "The tunnels are quiet at night." Jektar stepped into the small workspace. His crystal features caught the dim light, creating sharp shadows on the walls. "We've been talking about your performance in the simulation. The mission was successful," Kira said. "By accident," Thekmer growled. His massive frame filled the narrow entrance behind the others. "You got lucky with that climb. Could have gotten everyone killed." Navish moved to the left, his large eyes studying Kira intently. "Your reckless behavior shows you don't understand real military discipline." Kira noticed how they positioned themselves. Jektar in front, talking and drawing her attention. Thekmer blocking the main exit. Navish flanking to the side. Classic encirclement tactics. "I understand discipline," she said quietly. "I also understand when rules need to change based on circumstances." Jektar's crystal spines extended slightly from his neck and shoulders. Among Zephyrians, that was a sign of growing anger. "That's exactly the problem. You Deathworlders think you can ignore proper procedures whenever you want. Humans have no respect for command structure," Novesh added. "I've read about your species' military history. Constant rebellion and insubordination." Kira's hands remained steady as she listened to them. She had expected this confrontation eventually. The three aliens represented the Academy's most powerful student factions, and she had challenged their authority in front of the entire class. "Your people fight with primitive weapons on a backwards world," Thekmer said, stepping closer. "You know nothing about real warfare between civilized species. Earth military doctrine is based on chaos and brutality," Jektar continued. "There's no place for that kind of thinking in modern tactical theory." They kept talking, their voices growing harder. Kira listened to every word while her eyes tracked their positions. Jektar was trying to provoke an emotional response. Thekmer was using his size to intimidate. Navish was probably preparing some kind of mental attack. All of them assumed they understood her psychology. They expected fear, anger, or submission. Those were the normal responses when multiple predators cornered a single target. "You need to learn your place," Jektar said finally. "Humans might be useful as grunt soldiers, but you don't belong in command positions. The simulation proved you can't follow orders. Maybe we should teach her some respect," Thekmer suggested, cracking his knuckles. Navish nodded agreement. A lesson in proper hierarchy would benefit her education. Kira set down the tool she had been holding. Her movements were slow and deliberate, unthreatening. "You want to attack me because I embarrassed you in class. We want to educate you," Jektar corrected. "This is for your own good." She almost smiled at that. It was the same excuse bullies used everywhere in the galaxy. They always claimed to be helping their victims learn important lessons. "The tunnels have no security cameras," Navesh pointed out helpfully. "No witnesses to any training accidents. And maintenance staff won't be back until morning," Thekmer added. They thought they had planned everything perfectly. 3 against 1, isolated location, no evidence. They probably expected Kira to beg or try to run away. Most species would have been terrified in this situation. But Kira wasn't most species. She was human, from Earth, where survival meant learning to fight things bigger and stronger than yourself. "Last chance," Jektar said. "Admit you were wrong in the simulation. Promise to follow orders in the future. Maybe we can forget this conversation." Kira looked at each of them in turn. Jektar, with his sharp crystal armor and natural weapons. Thukmar, with his massive strength and tough hide. Navish, with his mental abilities and telepathic attacks. They were all formidable in their own ways. Under normal circumstances, any one of them could probably defeat her in single combat. Together, they should have been overwhelming, but they had made several crucial mistakes. First, they had cornered her in a small space where their numbers wouldn't help much. Second, they had assumed she would be helpless without weapons or backup. Third, they thought her silence meant fear instead of preparation. Most importantly, they didn't understand what it meant to grow up on Earth. Kira's home world was covered with creatures that could kill humans without effort. Predators with claws, teeth, venom, and incredible strength. Every human child learned to survive by being smarter, faster, and more adaptable than the things trying to eat them. The three aliens saw her as prey because she was small and quiet. They had never considered that. Earth's most dangerous predator might look exactly like that. "No," Kira said simply. The word hung in the air between them. Jektar's spines extended fully now, a clear threat display. Thutmar stepped forward, blocking any chance of retreat. Navish raised his hands to his temples, preparing to attack her mind. They expected her to break down and surrender. Instead, Kira shifted her weight and settled into a fighting stance they had never seen before. Navish attacked first, as Kira had expected. The Veltar pressed his hands against his temples and sent a wave of mental force toward her mind. It was a standard technique for dealing with lesser species. Most aliens would collapse immediately under the psychic assault. The mental attack hit Kira like a sledgehammer. But instead of overwhelming her, it crashed against defenses the Veltar had never encountered before. Human minds were different from other species. Millions of years of evolution on a deadly world had created natural barriers against mental intrusion. More than that, Kira had trained specifically for this kind of attack. Earth's martial arts included mental disciplines designed to resist torture and mind control. She had spent years learning to build walls around her thoughts. The psychic feedback hit Navish like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his large eyes wide with shock. "Impossible," he gasped. "Her mind is like touching fire." Thutmar didn't waste time with surprise. The massive Gorvani charged forward, using his natural strength and momentum as weapons. His species had evolved for exactly this kind of direct assault. Few things could stand against a Gorvani warrior in close combat. Kira didn't try to stop him. Instead, she moved. Her body flowed sideways at the last second, avoiding Thukmar's charge while staying perfectly balanced. As he thundered past her, she grabbed his extended arm and used his own momentum against him. The technique was pure judo, modified for fighting opponents much larger than herself. Thukmar crashed into the wall with tremendous force. His thick skull cracked against the metal surface, and he slumped to the ground, dazed but not permanently injured. Jektar watched his teammates fall with growing alarm. This wasn't going according to plan. The small human should have been helpless against their combined assault. "You cannot defeat me," he declared, extending his crystal spines to full length. "My people have perfected combat arts for thousands of years." He attacked with traditional Zephyrian sword techniques, even though he carried no blade. His crystal spines could cut through most materials, and his natural armor protected him from most weapons. Against an unarmored human, he should have been unstoppable. But Kira had studied every alien species in her classes. She knew that Zephyrian crystal armor was designed to deflect energy weapons. not deal with precise physical strikes at specific angles. She moved like water, flowing around Jektar's attacks while staying close enough to strike back. When he overextended on a particularly aggressive thrust, she found the joint where his shoulder armor connected to his chest piece. Her strike was not random violence. It was calculated precisely to disrupt the nerve cluster that controlled his dominant arm. The technique came from pressure point fighting, another human martial art that most aliens had never encountered. Jektar's right arm went numb instantly. He stared at it in disbelief, unable to understand how a simple touch could disable his limb. How? He demanded. Kira didn't answer. She was already moving to end the fight before any of them could recover and coordinate. Another attack. Navish was struggling to his feet, his mental abilities still disrupted by the psychic feedback. Kira reached him in 2 quick steps and applied a sleeper hold that cut off blood flow to his brain. The Veltar collapsed unconscious within seconds. Thukmer was shaking his head, trying to clear his vision after hitting the wall. Kira found the pressure point behind his massive jaw and pressed firmly. The Gorvani's eyes rolled back and he slumped forward, unconscious but breathing normally. That left only Jektar, who was backing toward the exit while cradling his useless arm. His crystal spines were still extended, but his confidence had evaporated completely. "This isn't over," he threatened. "My family has connections throughout the academy. You'll pay for this assault." Kira tilted her head slightly. "You mean the assault where 3 students cornered one in an isolated area with no witnesses, where they threatened violence to teach her a lesson about following orders?" Jektar's crystal features shifted as he realized the trap he had walked into. They had planned this attack carefully to avoid leaving evidence. But that same lack of evidence meant he couldn't prove she had been the aggressor. "You're all alive," Kira pointed out calmly. "If I wanted to hurt you, you would be dead." It wasn't a boast. It was a simple statement of fact. She could have killed all 3 of them within the first 30 seconds of the fight. Instead, she had used non-lethal techniques designed to disable without permanent damage. Emergency. Alarms began wailing throughout the academy. Someone had triggered the medical alert systems when they detected unusual biometric readings from the maintenance tunnels. Kira looked down at the unconscious aliens and sighed. She really hadn't wanted this confrontation, but they had forced the issue. Now there would be investigations and reports, and probably disciplinary hearings. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridors outside. Security teams were responding to the emergency alert. Soon this small maintenance alcove would be filled with academy staff asking difficult questions. "Chun." "Report." That voice belonged to Master Sergeant Kozlov. He must have cut his diplomatic mission short when he received alerts about his students' elevated stress levels. "Here." "Sergeant." Kira called back. Kozlov appeared in the entrance to the alcove, still wearing his dress uniform from whatever formal event he had been attending. His experienced eyes took in the scene immediately. 3 unconscious aliens, 1 calm human, and scattered tools from interrupted work. "Situation report," he ordered. 3 students attempted to assault me," Kira replied simply. "I defended myself using minimum necessary force. All attackers are alive and will recover fully." Kozlov knelt beside Thukmer and checked his pulse, then examined Navish and Jektar. His expression was professionally neutral, but Kira caught a hint of approval in his eyes. Academy security teams arrived moments later, followed by medical staff, and finally Professor Thross himself. The small alcove became crowded with officials asking questions and taking statements. Through it all, Kira remained calm and answered honestly. Yes, she had been attacked by 3 other students. No, she hadn't provoked the confrontation. Yes, she had used force to defend herself, but only enough to neutralize the threat. The medical staff confirmed that all 3 aliens would recover without permanent injury. They had been defeated through skill, not brutality, as the unconscious attackers were carried away on stretchers. Professor Thross approached Kira with an unreadable expression. "Remarkable restraint," he said quietly. "You could have killed them all." "Yes, sir," Kira agreed. "But you chose not to." "They made a mistake," Kira replied. "That didn't mean they deserved to die for it." Professor Thross studied her for a long moment. Indeed, most species would have shown less mercy to attackers who outnumbered them 3-1. He turned to Master Sergeant Kozlov. "I believe this incident requires a full investigation. However, initial evidence suggests Student Chun acted in legitimate self-defense." Kozlov nodded. "I'll handle the reports, Professor. This won't happen again." As the officials finished their work and departed, Kozlov remained behind with Kira. They stood alone in the maintenance alcove, surrounded by her scattered tools and interrupted projects. "You okay?" he asked simply. "Fine, Sergeant. No injuries." Kozlov picked up one of her modified helmet components and examined it. "Good work on the calibration adjustments. Academy equipment wasn't designed for human physiology." "Thank you, Sergeant." He set the component back on the table and looked at her directly. "They underestimated you." "Yes, sir." "Won't make that mistake again." "No, sir." Kozlov smiled slightly. "Get some rest, Chun. Tomorrow's going to be interesting." The Academy's investigation took 3 days. Security teams reviewed every piece of evidence from the maintenance tunnels. They interviewed witnesses, examined medical records, and analyzed the crime scene with scientific precision. Kira attended 2 formal hearings where she answered the same questions over and over. Yes, she had been alone in the maintenance areas. No, she had not threatened or provoked the other students. Yes, she had used force, but only to defend herself against multiple attackers. The evidence supported her story completely. Security recordings showed the 3 aliens entering the maintenance area together, clearly planning something. Medical scans proved that none of them had been seriously injured despite being defeated in combat. Most importantly, testimony from Academy staff revealed that this had not been a random encounter. Several instructors reported growing tensions between Kira and her classmates over the past weeks. On the 3rd day, Professor Thross announced the investigation's conclusions to the Advanced Combat Theory class. The classroom was tense as students waited to hear what had really happened in the tunnels. Student Jektar, Student Thakmer, and Student Navish have been found guilty of assault, Professor Thross declared. They will be transferred to other institutions immediately. The Academy does not tolerate attacks on fellow students, regardless of motivation. Whispers filled the classroom. Most students had expected Kira to be punished for fighting back against her attackers. The idea that she had been completely cleared surprised them. Student Chun acted in legitimate self-defense, the professor continued. Furthermore, she showed remarkable restraint in defending herself. Medical analysis indicates she could have killed all 3 attackers easily, but chose to use only enough force to neutralize the threat. The whispers stopped. Students looked at Kira with new expressions. She still sat in her usual corner seat, still took careful notes, still said nothing unless asked directly. But something had changed in how they saw her. After class, several students approached her for the first time. A young Veltar named Sekra was the first to speak. "Is it true you defeated them all without weapons?" she asked quietly. "I defended myself," Kira replied simply. "But how?" "Thekmer is twice your size, and Navesh is one of our strongest telepaths." Kira looked up from packing her notebooks. The other students were listening carefully, waiting for her answer. "Size isn't everything," she said finally. "Neither is mental power. Sometimes knowledge and preparation matter more than raw strength." A Zephyrian student named Velkan moved closer. He was much younger than Prince Jektar, with crystal spines that were still growing. My cousin told me that humans learn to fight dangerous animals on your world. Is that true? Earth has many predators, Kira confirmed. We learn to survive by being smarter than the things trying to kill us. The students exchanged glances. They had heard about Earth's dangerous wildlife, but they were starting to understand what that really meant for the humans who lived there. Over the following days, more changes became apparent. Students who had ignored Kira before began including her in study groups. They asked for her opinions on tactical problems and listened carefully to her answers in combat simulations. Team leaders started assigning her to missions that required creative problem solving. They learned that she could find solutions other students missed, especially when conventional approaches failed. Professor Thross began calling on her more frequently during lectures. Her insights about unconventional tactics and psychological warfare proved valuable to class discussions. Miss Chen, he said during one lesson about siege warfare, your people have experience with urban combat operations. How would Earth forces approach this defensive situation? Kira studied the tactical display showing a fortified city under attack. Human doctrine would focus on supply lines and civilian evacuation routes. Most sieges fail because of logistics, not direct assault. She stood and walked to the display, pointing out specific locations. Here and here, the defenders rely on outside supply convoys. Disrupting those routes would be more effective than trying to breach the main walls. Professor Thross nodded approvingly. Excellent analysis. Too many commanders focus on dramatic frontal attacks when patient siege work would achieve better results. The class took notes as Kira explained human siege tactics developed during Earth's many wars. Her quiet voice carried clearly through the room as she described patience, preparation, and psychological pressure as alternatives to brute force. When she returned to her seat, students around her were looking at her with respect instead of dismissal. The quiet human from the Deathworld had proven she understood warfare in ways they had never considered. The biggest change came from Master Sergeant Kozlov. He submitted a formal report recommending Kira for advanced placement in several courses. Student Chen demonstrates tactical thinking beyond her current class level, he wrote. Her unconventional approaches to problem solving would benefit advanced students. Additionally, her restraint under extreme pressure suggests command potential. The Academy's leadership reviewed his recommendation and approved it. Kira found herself moved into upper-level courses normally reserved for fourth-year students. She also received an invitation to join the Academy's Honor Society, an exclusive organization for the top 5% of students. The invitation surprised her, but she accepted it. At the Honor Society's weekly meeting, she sat among the Academy's best and brightest students from dozens of different worlds. These were the future military leaders of the Galactic community. When they asked for her thoughts on complex strategic problems, she spoke up confidently. Her perspectives, shaped by Earth's harsh environment and human military history, added new dimensions to their discussions. The key is never to fight fair, she said during one debate about defensive strategies. Fair fights are for sports. In real combat, you use every advantage available and create new ones whenever possible. An advanced student from the rigid Kirvani military tradition objected. Honor and proper procedure are essential to civilized warfare. Honor won't save your soldiers' lives when the enemy uses tactics your procedures don't cover, Kira replied calmly. Adaptation and survival matter more than following rules written by people who never faced your specific situation. The debate continued for hours, but other students found themselves agreeing with the human's practical approach more often than the traditional viewpoints. Word of these discussions spread throughout the Academy. Students began asking specifically for courses where Kira might share her perspectives on unconventional warfare and survival. Tactics. Professor Thross approached her after one particularly engaging class discussion. Miss Chun, I've been reviewing your academic performance. Your grades were already excellent, but your recent contributions to class discussions have been exceptional. Thank you. Professor, I'm recommending you for the Advanced Strategy track next semester. It's normally limited to students with significant combat experience, but I believe you would benefit from the additional challenge. Kira nodded acceptance. I appreciate the opportunity. Professor Thross smiled. The Academy exists to develop military leaders who can adapt to changing conditions. You've demonstrated that ability repeatedly. As the semester continued, Kira's reputation grew throughout the Academy. She was no longer the quiet human who sat alone in the back of classrooms. She had become someone other students sought out for advice and collaboration, but she still sat in the same corner seat, still took careful notes, still observed everything around her with patient attention. The difference was that now, when she offered insights or suggestions, the entire classroom fell silent to listen. They had learned that the quiet human often saw solutions that escaped everyone else. During the semester's final combat simulation, Kira found herself leading a mixed team of alien students through a complex multi-objective scenario. They faced superior numbers and hostile terrain, much like the exercise that had started her troubles months earlier. This time, when she suggested an unconventional approach, her teammates listened carefully. When she identified weaknesses in enemy positions that others had missed, they trusted her judgment. When she recommended patience over immediate action, they followed her advice. Their team achieved a perfect score. The first time any group had completed the scenario without losses. After the simulation ended, her teammate Sakura, the young Veltar, approached her with curiosity. How do you always know what the enemy will do? She asked. Kira packed her equipment slowly, considering the question. I watch. I listen. I think about what I would do in their position, then I prepare for multiple possibilities. That's all? That's everything, Kira replied. Most people see what they expect to see, but survival means seeing what's actually there, even when it doesn't match your assumptions. Sakura nodded thoughtfully. Is that why you never seemed afraid when those three attacked you? I was afraid, Kira corrected. Fear is useful. It makes you alert and ready to act. But I didn't let fear make decisions for me. As they walked back toward the main academy corridors, other students joined them. They had questions about tactics, about human military history, about how to think differently about common problems. Kira answered their questions patiently.